All right. Well, once again, we're discussing the reality of God, where this series is following Stephen R. Hemler's book. And we are into what he calls, well, thank you very much. We are into what he calls phase 2, or the section 2 of his book, which is on God and creation from a biological standpoint. But in week 4, before he goes too far in that direction, he sets up a basis. So, do creation stories found in the Bible, especially in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 3, contradict what science has discovered about the age of the universe and the development of life on Earth? And if you're anything like the group earlier today that saw this, there'll be quite a buzz after we're done. It was good talk had by all. So once again, our goal is using apologetics to see things new and then share it and realize how much God loves us based on all the things he's put into play for us. Those things that we never even consider, like we learned last week.
Always had a bent toward apologetics. I remember the first time I heard the gospel. I remember the name of Steve Morgan came into the locker room to share with me. You probably can't tell, but I played football when I was in college. He started to try to present something to me. I think it was, I'm not even gonna say what it was, because maybe you use that or whatever. I don't want to disparage it, because it's nothing against that. But he used some canned approach to evangelism, and I didn't have enough of the intellectual hooks to hang his thoughts on. I didn't, some of the concepts weren't working for me, and so he just backed up. And he was from Wisconsin and was a big Green Bay Packers fan, and so I should probably call him with my condolences. And he says when he talk about it now, he says, I was just thinking about that famous moment in Green Bay history. The coach goes, man, this is a football, and he just picked up his Bible and goes, Vody, this is a Bible. And for the next 2.5, 3 weeks, he came back every day. He answered my questions, because I had questions. And then toward the end of it, he taught me how to go find those answers myself. So I always say I was being trained in apologetics before I was even converted, And so I came to faith in that way. So I've always thought about my spiritual life through the lens of apologetics. But I also recognize that apologetics has sort of fallen out of favor.
He snuck up on me kind of quickly when that started. As he's pointed out, apologetics is sort of taken on in some circles, not even a bad name. It's just not even been talked about for decades. So this isn't just a Catholic issue. It is an issue that pervades all through the Christian faith. There are certain pockets within the Protestant denominations that are much better at it, but it's been dropped even by most Protestant denominations within the last decade as well. In some pockets, it's starting to make a comeback. So, based on what he said and what we're hearing each week, we have to meet each person where they're at, and that means being able to get them the answers they need so they don't get them elsewhere. So he was lucky enough to have a friend who was willing to back up, give him those intellectual hooks to put things on. If we don't arm our fellow man or help them install those hooks, they're going to go for the easy fix, something that just sticks. And scientism and materialism and just about every other ism out there that we're competing with will give them the easy answers. So how are the creation stories of Genesis to be understood? The Catechism of the Catholic Church reads in part, Scripture presents the work of the Creator symbolically as a succession of 6 days of divine work concluded by rest on the seventh day. And that is number 337 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And I put quotes around work and rest because obviously nothing is really work to God, and in turn he doesn't need any rest. But even in the symbolic nature of what's said in Genesis in the first chapter, we need to realize that we too do our work, but we have to return to that rest at least once a week to reconnect, find our grounding, not only in Scripture, but in the liturgy. So that's his example to us, and we should heed it. The Catechism of the Catholic Church also states that the biblical creation accounts use symbolic language and symbolism. So it's only been in the last 300 years that any Christian denomination thought of taking any part of the Bible literally. And it was almost in response to the age of the Enlightenment, where science was coming up with more and more facts. So some Christians dug their feet in and said, well, this is what it is, like it or leave it. And it's to our detriment. Our Jewish cousins who have the Torah, and we have the Pentateuch, same first 5 books of the Bible, they never took this literally. And if we're to read the Bible and interpret it in the same way Jesus would have in his day, we shouldn't be taking everything literally either. There are parts where we take it literally. Sometimes there's analogy. Other times there's history. And other times it's just, it's there for our moral good, our moral teaching.
What is creation according to the Church? Well, in the beginning, there was nothing. No space, no time, nothing. Only God. It's hard to imagine this because the way we experience, and thus we think in spatial terms. We have difficulty trying to imagine nothingness. As soon as we imagine something, for example, an empty black room, it's not nothing. Anyway, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, ex nihilo, out of nothing. The universe, the earth, strawberries, plum trees, earthworms, chickens, ants, man, everything. How exactly God created these things is a question addressed by science. The fact that he created everything is a certainty of faith.
So this is put out by a Catholic priest. It's actually in a few languages. He has about 72 videos, I want to say, on YouTube. It follows the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And what he's pointing out is the Catholic Church has never, ever been at odds with science. It's always been at odds with scientism, which is the idea that science explains everything, which is kind of ironic, because if you could say science explains everything, then you'd be able to explain that statement by science, but it's not scientifically verifiable. So saying something can only be explained by science, the statement itself is not even provable. Even in history where things get blown out of proportion, like Galileo and the church and the center of the universe being the sun of the earth, the most heinous thing that can be done by the church to an individual is to be excommunicated. Galileo was never excommunicated. He was on house arrest, but that was because of a struggle he was having with the Pope. It was political. He said some things, wrote some things. It was published. It was put out there. But if it truly was an argument that the church didn't like him making, he would have been excommunicated, and that is not the case. So Pope St. John Paul said in a general audience back in 1986, through the power of the work of the Creator's fiat, which means let there be, or it can mean let it be. The great fiat of Mary said, let it be done according to your word. The visible world gradually arises. In the beginning of the earth, the earth is without form and void. Later, under the action of God's creative word, it became suitable for life and is filled with living beings, with plants and animals, in the midst of which God finally created man in his own image. Above all, this text has a religious and theological importance. It doesn't contain significant elements from the point of view of natural sciences. So Pope St. John Paul II, back in 86, and this goes back way beyond him as well, the Bible is not a science textbook. People have turned it into a science textbook. They've turned it into a history book. That's not its intent. Pope Benedict followed up by saying in a General Assembly in 2013, the Bible isn't meant to be a manual of natural sciences. So this idea that we keep going back to that to argue with scientists is not the basis. Cardinal Christoph Schoenborn, general editor of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, who wrote a lot of it and was the editor and improved and corrected a lot of it, said in 2006 at a conference on creation and evolution that was attended by the Pope at the time, the first page of the Bible is not a cosmological treatise, cosmological just like we studied the first week, about the development of the world in 6 solar days. We never believed that. Our Jewish cousins never believed that. This is probably the most important line, one I love. The Bible does not teach us how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven. So it has a purpose, and it's not to be a science book.
In our world of practical atheism, in which the truths of faith are not denied but are simply held to be irrelevant, believers have to be increasingly able to give reasons for their faith. The Pope said we must recover and restore to modern man the chance to contemplate creation, its beauty and structure. The world is not some shapeless mass. Rather, the more we know it, the more we discover its wonderful mechanisms, the more we see a design, a creative intelligence.
So this message is being handed out to us over and over and over so that hopefully it trickles down. And if you listen closely to the narrator, he actually said something that the Pope said. He had a copy of it. It was actually 1 Peter 3:15, which we saw in previous weeks, which is always have an explanation or a reason for the faith that you have. So they're always sneaking that idea in there. And I think we've come to a point in society and history where we can't afford not to, based on how many people are leaving the Christian faith and how much our young folk depend on this information. So here's what we believe as Catholic Christians. God created the world from nothing, ex nihilo, literally from nothing. He said, let it be, the great fiat, and it was. That comes from our Catechism of the Catholic Church. We also believe that God made the universe in an orderly manner over a period of time. Everything God made is very good. If you read the first chapter of Genesis, every single day ends with it saying, this creation was very good, all except for the 6th day when he created man and woman, and that day he says it was very good. We are the pinnacle of his creation. Life appeared in ever-increasing complexity over a period of time, which you can also find following up in Genesis 1, verse 11, 20, 24, and 26. And each human being and all human beings together are the supreme culmination of God's creation and are created in God's own image and likeness, also from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So I have a little asterisk up at the top, the evolutionary creator. This is where the author has turned again. We're turning this week into biology and evolutionary creation from the Bible. He now wants to talk about exactly how this took place. So Pope Benedict XVI, in his papal address to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which I'm sure a lot of people are surprised to know that we even have one of those, affirmed the Church's understanding that evolution per se does not contradict belief in God's creative action when he stated, questions concerning the relationship between science's reading of the world and the reading offered by Christian revelation naturally arises. My predecessors, Pope Pius XII and Pope St. John Paul, noted that there is no opposition between faith's understanding of creation and the evidence of the empirical sciences. So he's telling us once again, there can never be a contradiction. As St. Augustine said, all truth is God's truth. So if there is a contradiction, someone is in error. It can be us and our understanding of what the magisterium and the Bible has taught, or it could be the scientist who's dug his heels in and doesn't want to believe in a creator. Pope St. John Paul stated in another General Assembly in 1985, "The evolution of living beings, of which science seeks to determine the stages and to discern the mechanisms, presents an internal finality which arouses admiration. This finality, which directs beings in a direction for which they are not responsible or in charge, obliges one to suppose a mind which is its inventor, its creator." So we saw in week 1 in first chapter of Romans, it tells us that people deny the truth. They're basically doing the ostrich syndrome and burying their head. The people who believe in scientism bury their head in the books that agree with what they believe, and they refuse to look at any other of the mounting information that we can see.
Is there a contradiction between the biblical creation account and the theory of evolution? Let us look at the first book of the Bible. In Genesis, there is not just one, but there are 2 creation accounts. Number 1 goes like this. God creates a bunch of things, then the animals, then man, the end. Number 2 goes like this. God creates a bunch of things, then a man, then the plants and animals of the field were brought. And since penguins, rabbits, mammoths didn't really complete man, God creates another human being, the woman. The end. Something's not right here. Is there a contradiction between these 2 accounts? Well, if what the Bible wanted to tell us was how things happen from a biological point of view, then we would indeed have a problem. But that's obviously not what the Bible is doing. Instead, it offers us 2 theological commentaries on creation. Number 1 explains the relationship of man to the rest of creation. He is, so to speak, the crown of creation. Number 2 explains how man and woman stand in regard to each other, that both are of equal value, that they complete each other in a union of love. This is the core message of the biblical narrative. The focus is not on biology, and that is why the Catholic Church doesn't really have a fundamental problem with biological theories, such as evolution. The statements of Pope Pius XII, Pope John Paul II, and Pope Benedict XVI make this clear. However, it is not as if the Church has nothing to say on the origin of man. It quite solemnly teaches that man is a special creation of God. He receives his spiritual soul directly from God. And this isn't a gradual difference from other creatures, but rather a qualitative leap, making man a created thing that is capable of friendship with God. Materialistic views of life, which are put forward by some biologists, are rejected. As long as this truth is protected, creation and evolution do not have to be contradictory. Indeed, the believer can understand evolution as the continued creation by God. And this process need not be random and undirected, even though it obeys natural laws and influences. God is the first cause. All other causes have their being and their very power to cause through Him. Everything not only exists because of God, but is directed to Him as to its final end. This is the position of the Church regarding the question of evolution. It safeguards certain revealed truths, but leaves the investigation of natural laws and processes to science. And this scientific endeavor continues to be exciting even today, since although there might be some general theories, we still haven't found all the answers, not by a long shot. For example, let us look at instinctual behavior in animals. It raises a lot of questions concerning the precise laws that govern evolution. Bees, for instance, can communicate the direction and the abundance of a food source through dance. Okay, so it looks a little different, but the thing about dancing is true. How could such a complicated form of communication develop in insects? Conventional models haven't been able to provide all the answers. This doesn't mean that science will not eventually find the answers, but it's certainly not as if we already understood everything. On the contrary, and that's why the exciting search for truth has to continue, along with an openness to being corrected once in a while.
So actually in that 3 minutes, that priest packed a lot into there. The idea that there's two stories in Genesis about the creation, there's many theories about that. In seminary I heard could have been northern Judea and southern Judea having held on more strongly to one version versus the other, one from God's point of view or one from man's point of view. Regardless, it's actually one of the questions that come up. I had 8th graders ask me, why are there two stories? Why are they different? I hate to say it, but I have a guy that I went to grade school with who I've been friends with since 2nd grade, and he pointed that out in the Catholic Bible because we have those little titles in between, and it was one of his arguments for why he left the Catholic Church. And I was trying to point out to him, those titles we added, but if you go to any Catholic Bible, it's the same story, and he didn't want to hear it. So it's pretty interesting when people lock onto an idea, they don't readily let go. They didn't talk about scientism, but they talked about materialism, and that's just the idea that since we can't say science proves everything because that statement isn't provable by science, we now call it materialism, which means everything we know can be proved by the material world. So in colleges, they're not even teaching about the mind anymore. They only teach about the brain. There's no such thing as the mind because that's ethereal. So you have a brain, it does all those functions. We don't talk about anything that can't be found in the material world. The idea that there's some problem between faith and science, once again, is very untrue. There's a problem between us and materialism, naturalism, scientism, and such. So here's where the author points out his point of view. Evolutionary creation, also called theistic evolution, is an idea that God ordained and sustained the gradual evolution of life on Earth. Evolutionary creation allows that traditional religious beliefs about God are compatible with modern scientific understanding of biological evolution. So I bring up the Nil Obstat and Imprimatur again, not to teach what it is, but that the idea is he can put some information in this book that not everybody agrees with, but the church hasn't taken a stance on. So he's not wrong in putting it in there, and he obviously got the Nil Obstat and Imprimatur, so it doesn't contradict anything the church teaches. So once again, his point of view is that evolutionary creation, also called theistic evolution, is the idea that God ordained and then sustained the gradual evolution of life on Earth. Obviously, he's beloved by his diocese as he has his own page. He works for the diocese. He works for his parish. He was an engineer by training and went to Virginia Tech. And then after he retired, he has a degree in a master's in pastoral studies, and then he got an advanced catechism of the Catholic Church certificate, and he also got an advanced catechism certificate from his diocese. So obviously, the man loves his faith, is knowledgeable, and has a certain opinion from a very scientific point of view, much like I would expect a lot of engineers and scientists to have.
Is there a contradiction between faith and science? Well, there's only one reality out there. Science seeks to understand and explain this reality by means of observation and reflection. In the process, it delivers theories and hypotheses about the world around us. Religion also seeks to understand that same reality, but not with the help of microscopes, rather with the help of God's revelation. It's concerned less with the problem of how something works, and rather with the question, why does the world exist, and what is its meaning? And so science and religion lived happily ever after. Well, unfortunately, not always. Problems can arise on both sides. If, for example, a scientist claims that life has this or that meaning, or none at all, then this is a mere claim and not the result of a scientific investigation. This happens because a scientist doesn't get an answer to these questions from the kinds of studies that he does. While he may be able to understand how something works, the question of ultimate purpose and meaning do not reveal themselves to him. To put it in an example, if I understand how a car works, why an engine runs, how all the parts work together, and so on, I nevertheless have absolutely no idea where the car is going. Paris? Vienna? Yerevan? Studying the parts of a car simply cannot answer that question. In the world out there, it is very similar. Science may explain how something works, but it cannot make a judgment on its ultimate purpose or value. In fact, whenever science attempts to answer these questions, it becomes decidedly unscientific. Problems can also arise on the side of religion. This happens whenever revelation is misinterpreted. For example, when the figurative language found in parts of the Bible is not understood as figurative, but rather explained word for word. Or if one were to ignore the fact that the Bible is not a divine dictation, but rather the work of divinely inspired authors working out of their own respective cultures, time, and language. When these things are forgotten, it can lead to errors and, quite possibly, to conflicts with disciplines of science. It is important to see in these cases, however, that it is not revelation that errs, which is impossible since it comes from God, but rather it is our interpretation of revelation that is in error. In this regard, the great theologian St. Augustine stated in the 5th century, "Usually, even a non-Christian knows something about the earth, the heavens, about the motion and orbit of the stars, and even their size and relative positions. And this is knowledge he holds to as being certain from reason and experience. Now, it is a disgraceful and dangerous thing for an unbeliever to hear a Christian, presumably giving the meaning of Holy Scripture, talking nonsense on these topics." When science and religion acknowledge their respective areas of competence, then both will get along. And even more, both will complete each other and help us to understand the whole of reality.
So the reason I pointed out that Mr. Hemmler and the Neil Obstad and the theistic evolution and the idea of science and religion can't be in conflict is because the stance that Mr. Hemmler takes is not one that the average theologian or scholar would take. It's a very small cottage industry. There's a half dozen books out there that talk about this theistic evolution, made popular by Francis Collins, who was actually in charge of the Human Genome Project here in the United States. They're Christians who very much, as scientists, want to straddle the line. So they buy 100% into the belief in God and 100% into the language and science that they've been instructed in. And the problem lies in the fact that there's something called deism. Deism is where we believe the Creator created a clock like the universe, then wound it up and walked away. He doesn't have any involvement in history or with us. He created everything and just set it in motion. This theistic evolution comes very, very close to talking in those terms, but does not cross the line. So are you allowed to hold that view without being in contradiction with the faith? Yes. Is it one that many people take? No. Not even our Protestant brothers and sisters are very fond of this idea. It seems to be very popular with scientists who also believe in God and want to have a foot on both sides of the fence. So how religion and science complement each other? There are things called primary causes. They are the first cause, but they're not the sole cause. So God is always the first and primary cause, but the very fact that He set laws up in nature lets us know that He's not a micromanager. He's not sitting there dictating. We have free will. He set up laws. He doesn't change them arbitrarily. Gravity will be here tomorrow, I can assure you. There's also secondary causes. These are dependent on the primary cause. So He creates those laws We have to obey them. We can't go faster than the speed of light or avoid gravity or any of those things that he set in place, but he doesn't sit there watching us to see if we'll try to violate them. There's also what's called an intelligent cause, which is due to the action of an intelligent agent. That agent, as they say, can be a human. We create things and we see design. Or it can be divine, as in the creation of the universe and man as its pinnacle. But there's also natural causes that are either random, they're chance, that's what most people in scientism want us to believe, or the necessary result of governing laws of nature. And I write, please note there, because the way it's worded, you can see his scientific, theistic evolutionary beliefs right there. He doesn't say, or the primary cause is holding it in being or setting it in motion. He says it's the necessary result of governing laws. So he sort of let God take a step back and not be involved in his own creation. So this is where it tends to be a little hinky and on the line of being close to deism, and that's why not many people are enamored with this evolutionary theism. So in 2004, there was a report from the Church's International Theological Commission, which Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, was president of at the time. And they came out with a document that read in part, God wills to activate and to sustain and act all those secondary causes whose activity contributes to the unfolding of the natural order which he intends to produce. Through the activity of natural causes, God causes to arrive those conditions required for the emergence and support of living organisms. So you can see in the beginning that he sustains all those acts, he's involved, but then you look at the last sentence and it sort of gives some wiggle room for those theistic evolutionary types. So this is where you can sort of straddle the line. Even Darwin, back in the mid-1800s, conveyed what our catechism would come to say later. Our catechism's only been around since 1992, 91. And the same belief, Darwin said, to my mind, it accords better with what we know of the laws impressed on matter by the Creator, that the world should have been due to secondary causes, meaning God puts this into action, he sustains it, he holds it in being, but he's not a micromanager seeing if we want to violate gravity. So later, the Catechism in number 308 reads, God is the first cause who operates in and through secondary causes. To me, that's an argument for what I would believe, that he operates in and through, he doesn't step back. So hopefully you saw where you could see things anew and where you could share it, but most of all, I hope this information showed you how much God loves all of us. He put these things in motion. He holds it in being. All of us were created for a purpose. And I'll leave you with this final quote. We are not some casual and meaningless product of evolution. Each of us is a result of a thought of God. Each of us is willed. Each of us is loved. And each of us is necessary. And this quote is from Pope Benedict XVI, proclaimed at his papal installation in 2005. They just don't make endings like they used to. I love these. All right, feel free to go to your tables. The questions are there.